We are very excited to have the CEO and President of Maxon US to talk about new technologies.
Thank you. I'm going to look pretty for a second. Now I'm going to put on my glasses. How's everybody doing tonight? Today? How was that lunch? Did everybody get their monster doll? I can't wait to get home with mine. So when they asked me to come out here and speak a little bit and actually include parts of myself, I wasn't quite sure what kind of value I could bring to the event. So I'm just going to tell you, they told me to talk about my background, how I got into this industry, what motivates me, how we approach the market, and where we think the market is going. If you don't know what I do, I work for Maxon. We develop a 3D animation product called Cinema 4D. Sort of, yeah, okay, good. There's some knowledge out there. There was a time when I would get dead blank stares when we first came into the market. The interesting thing is, in this industry, I've always felt like when we came into it kind of late. So I've always felt like we were the guy who crashed the party. And we're hiding out in the kitchen, spiking people's drinks with something tasty that nobody had ever seen or heard of before. It's been a fun place to be in, but we did kind of feel in the beginning like we weren't invited to the party. So I think someone else mentioned this earlier, but when I was a kid, if you said when I grow up, I want to be an artist, that pretty much got a negative response from your parents or anybody else that you might have known. And even when I was a little kid, I knew that being an artist meant a lifetime of grief and pain and poverty. Even the term starving artist is kind of a stereotype. And until the advent of the mass printing, art had one purpose: to be enjoyed, to be admired, something that you hung on the wall. Actually, till the Renaissance, pretty much. So when I started Maxon, or when I got into this industry, that was kind of the way we approached this market is that this was a way of facilitating artists, to facilitate artists. And nowadays, a fine arts degree doesn't mean a lifetime of poverty anymore. I've been saying this for years. I've been going to schools where they are just still teaching graphic arts and telling them that they need to start learning motion graphics and 3D, and that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity out there. That's been the nice fun part of my job, is actually showing people that they have the opportunity to get work. And for artists, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in the visual effects industry, motion graphics especially, interface design, fictional UI design, infographics, game design, theater projection, live projections or live demonstrations. Motion graphics was an area that we excelled in, or we did excel in. I can kind of get into a little bit about that. When they ask you to tell people about your background and you start to think about it and where you came from and how this all happened, it sort of feels like an episode of This Is Your Life. I actually called my brother and my sister and tried to remember some things that I didn't remember. And by the way, I think I just dated myself. Anybody actually remember that show, This Is Your Life? Yeah. So my father was a programmer in the 60s. My father actually worked for Wells Fargo and started out as an accountant, but got brought on to a team of guys that were going to build some of the first accounting programs on Intel 8080 machines. He actually also moonlighted at night over at Golden Grain and was writing an accounting program for them as well. Everybody remember the San Francisco treat? So in the Bay Area, he actually was working on some of the first accounting programs. So computers had been around my house since I was about 4 or 5 years old. Not many people had access to that. He actually programmed in Fortran. So you have to actually punch holes in these cards. You got it? Yeah. And literally it takes thousands of these to make something simple happen. I actually did my first programming class because my father encouraged me, was in Fortran, so I walked around school with the giant box of cards so that the computer would say, "Hello, world," after I punked in, 100 different cards. In the early 70s, my father and my brother opened up one of the first computer stores. It was a franchise called The Byte Shop. Started off in Mountain View, California, and the Byte Shop was mostly for hobbyists. Back then, everybody was building their own computers, and so this was one of the ads. Shopping for a computer at the Byte Shop is almost as fun as building one. And that's really what these were the type of people we serviced, guys who wanted to build their own computers. One of our other customers, or one of our other vendors, was Apple. Little known fact, the Byte Shop chain was Apple's first biggest outlet for selling their computers. We sold the Apple II for Apple, and some believe that if the Byte Shop hadn't come along, that Apple wouldn't be as successful as they are today, because we did sell quite a bit of Apples. That was not our most popular machine. Anybody heard of the processor technology Sol computer? No. Okay. This was our biggest seller. It actually predates the machines that IBM put out for small businesses for doing accounting. My father adapted his accounting program to this particular platform. It initially came with a cassette. Everybody remembers that. The programming was on a cassette. And then they were one of the first computers that had a floppy drive. And it's kind of hard to tell by the scale of this, but that was 8-inch floppy drives. Not 5 1/4 inch, but 8-inch floppy drives. And they actually only came out with 2 generations, went out of business, and took the Byte Shop with it. But my father did spend the rest of his life servicing these computers, because once a business buys one of these and they stick to it, it takes a long time for them to change. So way into I think the 80s, he was still adding and fixing bugs from his program, his accounting program on the Sol computer. My brother found this. This is actually an old newspaper that when the business first started in. Yes, that's me right there at about 15 building computers. My mother was an artist. My mother painted in oils. She painted watercolors, Japanese brush painting, and she also worked as a docent at the Oakland Museum of Art. So technology, art. How I got here, I don't know. Wasn't really planned. So, because I had a background in technology, when I was in college at UCLA working on my master's degree, I worked for ad agencies. I couldn't find a good image for ad agencies, so I went with Mad Men. And I did that not because I was a good artist. I did that because I knew Photoshop and Quark, and most people didn't know Photoshop and Quark at the time. This was in the early 80s. Excuse me. And most ad agencies hadn't really even tried using Photoshop yet, and it was just cheaper to pay me $100 or $200 an hour to fix an image that the photographer shot wrong. So think about that. I was able to make $100 to $200 an hour doing Photoshop work. And so I learned early on that at one point the technology is going to be complex and hard, not many people are going to use it, and eventually it'll be a minimum wage job or a free intern job, which Photoshop work would be nowadays. I got recommended for a job by a coworker to come over and work for Electric Image. Another 3D, my first foray into 3D animation. Was a Mac-only product. Anybody know about Electric Image back in the days? Yeah, there's one. And so it seemed fortuitous for me to fall into this job, because here I was in a high-tech job that was art-oriented. It was like, hey, this is kind of matching my skills. Not planned, but definitely fortuitous. This was in the early 90s. My job as the marketing guy was to try to reach new users. And the first thing I thought was, wow, this stuff's really hard. It's really complex. And I had taken some classes in this, and I took classes in other 3D animation packages. And so it occurred to me, maybe we should put out some tutorials and help people, bridge that knowledge gap so that we can get more users excited about using it. Well, back then, 3D artists didn't want to share any of their techniques. You would contact them and they'd say, it took me a year to figure that out. I'm not sharing that with anybody. It took me a lot to find an actual artist or two who would do tutorials for me. And this is we did little CD newsletters that had some interesting work, customer stories, and a couple of tutorials. And when I approached executives at the company about doing this and asking them about what artists might help me, one of the executives actually said, well, if they can't figure out how to use it, they shouldn't be buying it. They're not in business anymore. So once they got bought, I went back to my freelance days in the ad agency world, and somebody introduced me to a product called Cinema 4D. That was the first box I sold. And it started out as a freelance job at first. And then eventually they asked me if I would be interested in opening up an office and servicing the Americas. Seemed like a fun idea, so I thought, what the heck, we'll give it a try. But how do you introduce a new 3D package into a market of mostly studios who are very set in their ways and their pipelines? It was kind of an interesting problem. But remembering that at one time I was making $200 an hour at best on Photoshop, I realized that this market was going to open up to other animators and smaller studios and other artists. So when you would get to these studios to talk to them about doing or taking a look at Cinema 4D, most of them would say, we already have a 3D package. Or if I'd approach a school, they'd say, we already teach a 3D package. But it occurred to me, being an artist in the past and actually using multiple tools, I thought, if you were painting, would you only use one brush? I mean, you've got different heads, you've got synthetic and natural hairs, you've got short and long brushes, you've got different sizes brushes. And once you get to know how a brush works, it almost becomes a part of you as an artist. And you can make things happen that much faster. And it seemed to me, well, 3D's kind of that way, only way more complex. And you think about the amount of time it takes to get it to understand how to use a 3D package. How, you know, once you've got in there, you can't, there's going to be techniques and there's going to be advantages of using different 3D packages and different 3D technology. So I realized I was talking to the wrong guys. Instead of talking to this guy, I needed to be talking to these guys, who are actually some of my favorite guys. Anyway, so much nicer to be talking to artists. So we focused, I tried to turn our focus to artists. So how do we discuss things with an artist? And actually, I think it was Trevor from Up had mentioned that it all came down to the artists and the work that they're doing. I'm famous in this market for saying when people try to get me to compare Cinema 4D to other 3D packages, I always say, it's another paintbrush in the tool set. It does some things really well that the other packages don't do. And they've got some things that they do really well. Excuse me. But it is valuable to have in your tool set. Now, approaching artists can be a bit of a challenge because artists are very passionate about their tools. And like the operating system wars that are still raging on, 3D artists tend to get really passionate about if you try to tell them you've got an interesting new 3D tool that might be better than theirs. And you could never approach it that way. Again, another paintbrush in the tool set. Because if you think about the amount of time that they've put in to learn their 3D package and master that 3D package, saying something like that sort of invalidates all that time and energy that they've put into learning their tool. So our job was to not throw away the work that they've done, but how can we add value to the work that they're doing? So how do you sell it? How did we sell a 3D product, or how you sell a new technology or tool to the artist? Well, it's understanding that they not only have an analytical way of looking at things, but there's an emotional response to an art tool. Artists are creative. It's about the emotion that comes out. This is a very personal thing, how a tool works. Having respect for the process, 3D is hard. And if an artist is going to take the time to look at your 3D package, have a little respect for that, because it takes time to look at it. And if they take the time to learn it, have that much more respect. And then on top of that, if they turn out something pretty, even more so. Validation. The first question is always, who else is using it? Where has it been used? Show me some pretty pictures. What movie was it used in? Having that community acceptance is extremely important to artists. And then user experience is remembering that it's more than just the interface and the functions. You know, there's also the human factor. How does the company deal with me as a person? If I have trouble when I call tech support, is somebody going to help me, or are they going to tell me, well, if you can't figure it out, maybe you shouldn't have purchased it in the first place? It also means integration. Integration is incredibly important. If I'm saying that our tool is another paintbrush in the tool set, then I should be able to add that paintbrush to my palette. Should be able to dig it into the same blots of paint so I can start working with it right away. I don't want to have to deal with incompatibility with other applications and those types of things. So it occurred to me, who better to be compatible with? how about Adobe? Everybody picks up Photoshop and Illustrator before they pick up a 3D package. Every student has gotten into image manipulations before they even think of 3D applications. So that became one of our goals, or one of my goals, was to make sure that we were seamlessly working with Adobe's products, especially After Effects, which is a 2D motion graphics tool. Why not? How can we bring 3D to that workflow? So I came up with a philosophy of how to approach the artists in our market, and this was to engage them, inspire them, educate them, and then motivate them. Doop. Engagement. Of course, you have to get their attention, but it's more than just marketing at them. It's starting a conversation, and that conversation's about not only about your tool, but what do they need the tool to do, and getting that feedback from them. Feedback and contribution from your customers is probably the best competitive edge you can ever have. Evangelists for your product are the best thing you can ever have. And you can leverage that success. Artists that are being successful with your tool is a great way of selling your tool, because now you can start promoting them, and then by osmosis they're promoting you. And so we would try to stimulate engagement behavior both back and forth, us communicating with them and hopefully getting them to communicate with us as well. Inspiration. Inspiration is an incredibly powerful thing. I mean, everybody's heard this. When I saw Star Wars, that was it. I wanted to be in that industry. When I saw The Matrix, I mean, there's probably about 5 or 10 films that probably have created a lot of the artists. What was yours, Brandon? Jurassic Park. Yep, that was the one I forgot to mention. Jurassic Park. Every artist has that movie or has that film that they saw that made them want to get into this industry. Art inspires art. And then promoting them. We try to do everything we can to promote the artists that are using our tool, who are putting out work that is inspirational, like Brandon's work, which you're going to see in a few minutes. And try to not only have them show what they've done, but how they did it, so that it looks accessible to the person who's trying to get into the industry. Oh, I could learn how to do that too. And so we also try to reward that contribution with promotion and other things. Education. I was almost going to put the Matrix image in there because it's almost as good, but this is a bit more retro. Education. Help them be successful by giving them the tools to learn how to use the program. Inspire them with knowledge. Show them projects that they can do. It's not just, I didn't know you could do that. It's even better is, I can do that, by looking at what they were doing. And we have our artists come out to trade shows and show how they do things. Brandon included has come out and shown people how to make these things happen. Part of that is having to facilitate resources. When I first started Maxon here in the States, nobody knew who we were, and there was no books about Cinema 4D. There was no tutorials. There was no schools teaching Cinema 4D, so we had to facilitate those resources. One of the things we did was create a site called Cineversity, where we started putting up tutorials. Interestingly enough, this is back in the mid-90s, we were the first 3D company to put up tutorials where people could learn how to use our product. Really, all it was self-preservation. I had one tech support guy, and so when he would get a call from somebody over and over, or the same call, those problems, I said, you know, maybe if we put a tutorial up about that and throw it online, you can just say, hey, go watch that tutorial. So we started doing that. Later on at a trade show, because a lot of these tutorials were general 3D things. Hey, I don't know how to make this happen. I don't know how to shadow this, or I'm trying to make this happen. So a lot of them were very general 3D. Later on at a trade show, I was approached by the head of tech support at Meta Creations. Anybody remember Meta Creations? No? Infinity, Ray Dream, there you go. And he said, hey, I got to thank you for your tutorials. They're awesome. I send all my customers there. Because they didn't have anything like that. And it answered pretty simple 3D stuff. Motivation. Now that you've got them excited, how do you get them to do something with the package? Did I mention 3D's hard? So how do you get somebody to sit down and spend hours trying to create something of value? What was it Trevor said? Ambition. What was it? Ambition exceeds preparation. I guess the equivalent of 90% inspiration, or 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration. Same thing in 3D. So the idea was, how do we come up with ways of encouraging them to do it? Give them a reason. How about, how do I get people to share their techniques, make them part of the community? And how do I motivate them to contribute to the community? How do we get all four of those on board, or how do we get all four of those things working at the same time? And tie it all back into Adobe. We started doing what was called the Power Integration Tour. I hired some artists to create some broadcast graphics, professional-looking broadcast graphics, using Photoshop, Illustrator, Cinema 4D, and After Effects. And then we toured around the country doing these workshops and presentations, showing them the piece, how to do it, broke it down, and lo and behold, it was all in tutorials on Cineversity. And afterwards, when people would run up and say, that last piece was really cool, can I get that one project? And they would hand us thumb drives, and we would upload the project files on the thumb drives. My favorite part was one of the projects that I had worked on. I went, when I was watching American Idol one year and the opening came on, I went, that's my assembling building. It was actually our project. So people started using those projects and taking what we were teaching them and adding that 3D element into their projects, which was kind of nice. Which led us to Adobe calling us and saying, you know, we just did a survey of our customers, and 60% of our customers are using Cinema 4D with After Effects. How about we put a nice little light version of that in there with After Effects? So how's that for validation? Get that kind of validation as to have Adobe want to include your product in there because you've made your product synonymous with their workflow. Once we got that in there, we created a website called WinC4D. Once again, how do we motivate them to try out that light version? Well, if you use After Effects and the light version of Cinema 4D, you can enter a contest, create a 5 to 10 second animation, and you can win a commercial copy. So we gave them a reason to play around with the application. So I know I'm supposed to be talking about technology and, hey, where's technology going? But if you haven't noticed, for me, technology is a tool for the artist, and what the artists do with our tool is far more interesting to me than what the tools do, because the tools are just the method by which they create things. And I truly believe that we were really lucky, or I was really lucky when they gave me this opportunity to open up Maxon here in the States, that we came at a time when there was a renaissance of sorts, that the transition from large studio to medium-sized studio to boutique studios to even singular artists was happening. And we were speaking to the artists, so we were getting there. And nowadays, small teams are turning out the same amount of work as these larger studios were able to do. And you might say, geez, one day, a single artist is going to turn out a full-length animated feature all by himself, right? Everybody's imagining, God, that one day some guy's going to turn out a whole full-length feature all by himself using a 3D package. Well, I got one who'd done 3. Since 2007, I don't know if any of you have heard of M.Strange. Of course you have, Vicki. Thanks, my press person. You've heard of it, of course you have. This is all done by a single animator. He's turned out 3 hour-and-a-half films by himself since 2007. Tremendous amount of work. By himself, literally by himself. The guy is amazing. He calls himself the Walt Disney of weirdos. His work is very dark and very stylized, but as you can see, it's hey, how come we went, oh, there we go. It looked like it was gone. His name is M. So it's the letter M, D-O-T, not the dot, M.Strange. Highly recommend checking out some of his pieces. You can see his work is really fascinating. He cuts corners left and right, but he gets the piece done. He tells a lot of great stories. He was actually at one of our trade shows where he shows how he doesn't care what's happening with the legs if that's not where he's framing. He's like, worry about that. I don't have to have the leg. They're not in the shot. But probably one of the biggest problems for him is distribution. As you know, nobody raised their hand except my press person. So this guy's been out there turning out movies by himself since 2007, yet he's not getting that distribution. Now, We do have the internet. We've got YouTube. We've got Vimeo. We've got all these outlets for artists to express themselves, which is nice. The internet and all that's sort of like the modern day salon de refusé, you know? But it lacks focus. And so what I wanted to make a point for that is we hear all these things about the studios and the artists and the battles that are going on there. Well, the studios definitely need the artists, but I believe that the artists need the studios as well. And some fine examples of masters of our time who have really kind of needed that person at the top to make these things happen. You look at the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo didn't even want to work on it. He was busy chomping away at a tomb for Pope Julius. And Pope Julius wanted him to work on the Sistine Chapel, so he took him off that project. Anybody seen Pope Julius II's tomb? No. Or even heard of it? Same thing with the Last Supper. Da Vinci was working on some personal projects when the Duke of Milan approached him about this, and he really didn't want to do it, but he offered him a lot of money. Without Disney, there was no 9 Old Men of animation. There was no 12 Principles of animation. And even he recognized that his greatest achievement was bringing those people together and coordinating that work. So I like to think nowadays there are what I think some masters of today, the work that they do. Without Peter Jackson, there wouldn't be any Dylan Cole. Anybody heard of Dylan Cole? Thanks, Vicky. If you watch, you have, there you go. If you watch movies nowadays, I think we overlook these amazing animated environments or basically animated matte paintings that these guys create. Let me go back to playing it. These guys are masters at the work that they're creating. Without James Cameron, there would be no Steve Messing. Everybody knows Avatar. The artists that were behind this, that created these environments, absolutely incredible. And these are works of art. I truly believe, I think somebody's missing the boat. Somebody at an art show should have plasmas hanging on the wall, strip the actors out of the movies, and put these amazing matte paintings in the background. Just put them up as masters. They're just incredible. So, once again, I'm supposed to be talking about technology. But it's interesting that they're asking me to talk about forward thinking. I'm not an early adopter. I'm not the kind of guy that goes out and buys the latest piece of hardware or downloads the operating system the day it was released. Strangely enough, I work in 3D. I look at technology as a way for artists to express themselves, and I think that's the most important part of it. What I do think, looking forward, is that there's going to be even more work for artists. One of the adages, or one of the reasons we focused a lot on the motion graphics market, the broadcast market, was because when I grew up, there were 3 TV stations. So there's 3 TV stations for a graphic artist to make up the NBC logo, lower thirds, interstitials, bumpers, et cetera, et cetera. Sooner or later, there was a few hundred with the cable company. With my Fios now, I've got thousands of channels. And as the internet becomes a broadcast medium, you're talking about millions of TV stations where artists can express themselves. Flying logos, bumpers, interstitials. And that's why a lot of the work that we did was focused on that in the beginning. Now, Cinema 4D is used for visual effects. It's used for medical animation, architectural and engineering visualization, scientific and medical animation, just like any other 3D package. Motion graphics was our way into the market, but it is used in all the other mediums as well. And some of the mediums that I found that I thought were interesting, and I've still been waiting for it. If anybody remembers on the Minority Report, the animated cereal box, they've had these paper-thin screens since the 70s. This is an old 1970s film from Sony where they've got the flexible screens. I guess they haven't gotten down to getting cheap enough yet. We have seen a lot of, I didn't mention this, we have seen a lot of live stage design, the use of animation for replacing practical sets. An amazing piece that one of our customers did was for Peter Pan, where they actually created London in the 1850s and they flew the children around in front of the animation. It was done in a circus tent and projected in the round. It was absolutely gorgeous. It'd be nice to see them bring it back. It didn't get a lot of attention when it was here the first time. Started off in London, but incredible work. And there's also augmented reality. We're already seeing we had that was almost every trade show you can say, oh, that was the non-linear editing year for trade shows. And that was that, every year you had one. This year was augmented reality. There was almost every trade show I've been to, there's been a lot of people coming by asking about creating content for augmented reality. And I think that brings us further forward to virtual reality. Obviously, we're going to have artists who are going to have to create whole worlds for people to walk around in and express themselves in. And that's pretty much all I had to say about that. I'm from MAXON Computer. If you'd like to find out more about us, you can go to maxon.net. You can go to syndiversity.com to see some of our tutorials, and if you want to win a copy, you can go to winc4d.com. Thank you. Sorry about the cough. A little tickle. Anybody have any questions? Yes. She's behind you.
Yes, I do have a question. You may have said this at the beginning. I'm not quite sure if you did, but I'm curious as to where the technology is developed, how many engineers they have working on it, and I know that you're more thinking not in terms of technology but artists, but how do you keep the technology moving forward? Because in reality, you need to offer the artist more flexibility in order to be able to get the costs of production down.
Mm-hmm. Those are great questions. Little bit, but not directly did I address those things. Maxon started off in Germany, a small company in Germany. The program was actually written as a part of a contest, a programming contest, by two brothers. They wrote a ray tracer back in the early 80s. And somebody approached them and said, hey, you should make some modeling tools. And somebody said some texturing tools. And that was just a little over 20 years ago. So we still have the two brothers. They're still part of the core development team. But it just started off with the two brothers. When I came on, there were 4 programmers. And now we have a very global virtual team, probably about 18, I believe, 18 programmers. How we stay ahead of the curve is still part of my conversation, which is the conversation with artists. We speak to artists constantly to find out, okay, so how can we make this work better, faster, and improve production time? Part of that integration with After Effects was a huge leap in productivity, was one of those things that happened, because previously what you would have to do is you'd have to render all your files out of Cinema 4D, render all your movies or your still images out of Cinema 4D into these folders. So you'd have thousands of frames of animation. Then you would bring those into After Effects, and you could apply effects to that, and then you would render that out of After Effects. Now with what we've done with this Cineware connection with After Effects, you can actually just bring the Cinema 4D file into After Effects. You can apply the effects to it, and you render once out of After Effects. So you've skipped the render process into After Effects, and you've skipped the storage problem of all those frames. Now there are those who probably still work the old way, and there's some ways, in some cases, it is a better workflow depending on the complexity of the project. But that was a huge leap in productivity, and a lot of that came from working with artists. So it is a lot of talking to artists and staying ahead of the curve. It's very hard to stay ahead of the curve, absolutely. I've been working in this industry since I was little, and I've seen so many products and projects. I mean, the Sol computer failed after 2 generations. I was a huge fan of, there was a product that was the competitor to Director, and loved that one. It got killed by Quark. Thank you, Quark, for killing 2 products. But it is a matter of staying in contact with customers and finding out what they need and keeping your eye out for new technologies. I mean, it's not hard to know what people want. Easier and faster is always on the top of everybody's list. Thank you. Anybody else? Hey. Are you the Don Pardo of the afternoon? Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much.